All right. Well, welcome to our Grindstone, which is the conclusion of our Science and Faith Conference. Many of you are here in the room that are that have been part of the conference. We have some students who've also come in just for the Grindstone tonight. So we welcome you here as part of this event. And we want to spend most of our time doing Q&A, and we're going to do some Q&A primarily from the audience, because I know many of you have questions that didn't get answered. You had your hands up when we ran out of time for particular sessions. So this is your opportunity to ask the questions that you didn't have a chance to ask. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to start us off just kind of offering a quick question to each of our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for questions. And so that's going to be our plan for tonight. So one thing that I do ask of you is, when you ask a question, the way we handle questioning here at Grindstone is that we'll have a microphone that'll go around. Philip will have a microphone running around here, and what we'll do is, if you'll raise your hand, Philip will bring you the microphone. If you will state your name and where you're from, particularly for those of you who are students, so that our panelists will know who is asking them a question. And then if your question is directed towards a particular panelist, you can go ahead and direct that question to them. And then go ahead and state your question as quickly as possible, so that we can our goal is to get as many questions answered tonight as possible. So if we can do that, we're going to go ahead and get started then. So first up, I'm just going to work my way down the line a little bit. So Dr. Keyes, you're sitting next to me, so you get the first one. You were talking in your session about training high school students. So let's talk broad perspective here. Why is it so important for us to train our high school students how to answer the questions of the relationship between science and faith before they get to college?
There's this disease called naturalism, and we need to not inoculate our students before they get to campus, where they get exposed to this or overexposed to this. And the studies that have been done on Christians that leave the church after they leave their high school youth groups show that about 2/3 of our students are leaving the church, but about half of those come back to the church in their late 20s and early 30s. So it's not a complete loss, but it's a big loss. And it's not just those going to college, it's those going into careers and other just leaving, their home environment. And so we need to, this college prep thing that I described earlier through if you go to God, what is it again? Good. You see, was that planned or not? See if you were paying attention to anyway, you go to that website I mentioned, but there's lots of resources there to help prepare your students for the challenges ahead of them. Once they get to the university, the best help nowadays on the campuses, besides the churches that provide ministries to college students, is Ratio Christi. I mentioned that. So Ratio Christi means the reason of Christ. And I'm on the board of directors, and it's a very intelligent design, friendly apologetics club movement that's going internationally. And so that's, if you didn't, regardless of how well you prepare them, they still need support once they get there. And our students need to know about these organizations that exist, so that they're ready to plug into the churches that have good college groups, the campus ministries, and then especially apologetics campus ministry, and Ratio Christi networks with local churches and with local campus ministries like Crew and Navigators to provide apologetics resources once they get to college. But our students need to know about that before they leave.
All right. Doug Axe is next, and so talk to us a little bit about, if there's one thing that you could communicate from your history of being in the field and working with science, for the last 25 years, the one thing that you wish people in the churches understood, so that they could engage in these conversations, with coworkers and with people in their neighborhoods, to know about, to be able to engage in conversations with people who say, look, the science proves that there's no such thing as God, or that God didn't create this world. What's the one thing you wish people in the pew would understand?
I think the one thing I'd like to instill is confidence, and the way I think we get confidence, people who are not of a technical background, is just understanding how powerful the simple things are, how powerful the simple arguments are. So the one thing I would convey is the simple argument, which the book tries to do. And what I'm trying to get beyond the argument is the sort of confidence that allows people not to be intimidated when big shots are being big shots, because really it's smoke and mirrors in the end. And simple, true things have always been the most powerful. And, Jesus didn't come giving us theories and formulae. He came giving simple, powerful truths. And they were rejected by the academics of the day, but he didn't go that way. He stayed with the simple, powerful truths. And I think that's a lesson for us.
All right. John West, you are employed by the Discovery Institute. So I want to give you an opportunity with this question to kind of tell us what are the resources, the best resources that the Discovery Institute is offering. Particularly, a lot of our students here are preparing to serve in local church ministry. What can the Discovery Institute do for local churches to help them along in these conversations?
I'm going to sound like Mike Keyes. Go to scienceandgod.org and look at the resources, because that is one of the websites we put together. But, we have lots of stuff, books, discussion questions, videos, online videos that you can point people to. And we have actually, this hasn't been publicly announced yet, but about 2 or 3 years ago, we did a national simulcast with John Lennox and Steve Meyer and Eric Metaxas on science and faith. Are they really in conflict? And some of you may have actually participated in this in your church. We had churches all across the country. It was somewhat expensive because of the group that we partnered with. That's a requirement that they had, and they got the funding, not us, unfortunately. I wish we would have. But we now have the rights to that, and so we are going to be making that available for people who want to show that in small groups and in churches as a one-off event for free, basically, sometime in this next year. And so that's another easy event that you could do in your church of just, if you have an hour or two, where it's sort of a prepackaged event, and you could then, match it with a Q&A. But I'd say, number one, I'd also, for those of you who were here earlier, those of you who weren't, this survey that we did last year, that we published this report, Darwin's Corrosive Idea, a lot of things that we end up hearing is that people need to be convinced that this is a serious issue. And pastors need to be convinced. Elder boards need to be convinced. Other lay leaders in the church need to be convinced. And I think taking that survey and showing people just how people's wrong views about science really do impact their views on faith and ethics can help convince them that you really do need to do something. But we have it all. We have books, discussion questions. We have, for those of you who may be wanting to go on to the ministry or to graduate school in science, we do a summer program. Basically, part of it is for people going on to graduate school in the sciences. Part of it is for people who are going on to, the pastorate or other culture-forming initiatives. And we get applicants from all around the world. We pay the expenses, and we've actually had at least one student from Southwestern in the program. And so I'd encourage you to apply. It's about a month more before this year's deadline is. And then we also do events that you could plug people into. So we do have a Dallas area office now. It's actually moving to Frisco, but it's not that far from here. I mean, it's in the wider Metroplex area. And so, but that will allow us to do more and more events in this area. So if you are part of a church that needs a speaker, we can't supply all the requests that we get, but we do take them seriously and try to connect people. We now have a group of local clubs called Science and Faith, Science and Culture Network, of local organizations that we then help provide resources for. So you could actually, if you go to, in your community, you want that, you might start something like that. And then finally, just for this area, I was Pam noted that I forgot to actually mention that we have a couple of events coming up next month. So if you are in this greater Dallas-Fort Worth area, you should know that our biologist Jonathan Wells, author of a book called Icons of Evolution, which was really earth-changing when it came out in the early 2000s, now is going to have a sequel that's coming out this spring, and he'll be speaking at the University of North Texas on April 27th. And then on April 28th, we're going to be having Ray Bolin again and Jonathan Wells for high school students who are both primarily private school and homeschooled for an intelligent design education day, sort of a half day from 10 to 2 at the Hope Center. So those are just some things.
All right, and Ray Bolin, our last panelist down there, you were speaking to us upstairs before dinner about the unique nature of mankind. If you were to communicate one thing, we're kind of on a theme here with the churches. If there were one thing, if you were in a church and you had 30 minutes or even less than that, the one thing that to communicate to allow the people in the church to then go out and be able to have some of these conversations about the unique nature of mankind, what would that be?
Well, I would go back to one of the things I focused on, and that is the human's ability to control and utilize fire. It is absolutely unique of any organisms that we are the only ones that are capable of doing so and have done so. And it requires a whole suite of biological characteristics that are also unique to human beings. As I talked about, the dexterity of our hand to be able to manage all the different things, to construct, to put a fire together, to start the fire, the ability to rationally overcome the fear of fire, to even begin to reason through, I can use this for something, I can, in a sense, tame it, if you will, and find some positive use for it. And overcoming that and being able to utilize fire is what has made technology possible. So because of the ability then to utilize metals and to get higher degrees of heat, to soften up metals, to use them, and then leading to chemistry, electricity, all those things, that's something I think anybody could discuss and talk about. And it's easy to communicate, it's easy to understand that we're unique in our ability to use fire, and just begin listing some of those things: overcoming the fear, rationally thinking through how to start one, use it, control it, how to begin to apply it over time, and then the various physical capabilities, the visual acuity, the three-dimensional of if you're going to start a fire, you better be really clear what you're doing up close. If you're an eagle just looking for movement, that ain't going to help you any, all right? And so there's just a lot of, as I said, a suite of biological characteristics that all come together to allow us to utilize fire, which is absolutely unique. So it's something I think anybody could do.
And we have a 20-minute video for free online called FireMaker that will also, you could share on social media, show it to your friends, that could help you even fire start that conversation.
All right. Well, what I want to do now is I want to open the floor for questions. Those of you who've been at the conference, I'm sure you've got many questions. For those of you students who didn't get a chance to attend the conference, we've been talking about the relationship between science and faith and whether or not they're in conflict, and we've got a great panel of experts up here.
Can I just add one
Sure.
thing? I realize that mostly Baptist students here, but there are seats up front.
You're on dangerous territory there, Dr. Bolin.
I know.
You got to get here early to get the seats in the back. That's the way it works in Baptist life.
I don't know who this would be addressed to, but probably Dr. Bolin or Dr. Ack. Perry Marshall, Third Way Evolution. Would you care to comment, critique, explain?
What was that, Alan?
The Marshall's view of evolution. I mean, I haven't been able to do a whole lot of look at it, but he talked about the elasticity within the cell, kind of compared it to like the Swiss Army knife, something like that, that it kind of does what it wants to when it needs to. Could you comment on something like that?
I probably shouldn't. I don't. I've met him and I've heard some of the things he said, but I can't give any detailed comment because I'm not that clear on his.
I would encourage you, there was just a recent debate on British radio with Stephen Meyer and Perry Marshall. So for anyone interested in our take or the take of our scholars on his book, it's available online. You can go to our website and listen to it. I've also met him and I'm somewhat familiar, but again, I'm not a scientist, I'm a social scientist, but my best understanding of what he's arguing is many of his critiques are basically the same critiques that intelligent design proponents have made. And so insofar as he makes that, it really isn't anything new. It's actually recapitulating what our scholars have been saying for 2 decades. His new proposal doesn't really seem to address, though, the problem. And so he is trying to advocate this third different way, but insofar as he does that, he seems to question back some. But what I would really refer people to is Stephen Meyer's debate with him. So.
The question I have, I'm Tom Winkler from Garland. The question I have is it's seemingly the circular argument that almost has to get into metaphysical to get natural scientists to accept at least the possibility that science could be more than just natural explanations. And it seems like within the argument, if you even propose an intelligent designer that can't be described exactly with biology or chemistry, then the argument gets closed before it can even get started. Any breakthroughs in how to break through that thought process that you see out there?
So I think of Richard Dawkins and the Who Designed the Designer response to intelligent design. I think it can help. I'm not saying that I've had a breakthrough where I got someone out of that mode, but I think if you can get people to reflect on what are your presuppositions coming into this, you have them. And so for Dawkins, he's assuming that everything is going to be, that it's basically a position of scientism where all knowledge comes through the scientific method. There is nothing true that cannot be shown to be true through science. And yet you could just sit down and say, well, how do you do science and what are the assumptions you have to have in order to do science, like philosophical realism, and what experiment did you do to validate realism? So it's very clear that you have to accept certain things to be true, like there is an outside reality that we can make factual statements about that cannot be subjected to a scientific experiment. You have to accept it before you do science in order to do science. If you get someone to be past the sort of knee-jerk front and reflective about what their own philosophy is, then they will have to admit that there is a philosophy. And then you can start to talk, well, why your philosophy and would you consider another philosophy? I think that's the way I would go.
Just to add to that, if you get them to reflect on their own experience as an intelligent agent, you are an intelligent being, aren't you, right? And they would hopefully agree, right? That you reflect, you make decisions, you think about consequences and purposes and all kinds of things.
That's all just biochemistry,
Well, yeah. But you get them to reflect on their experience of this, not on their theoretical attempt to reduce this but on their experience of it. Doesn't it seem like you experienced this? Well, then as they think about their experience as an intelligent agent, well, that's a real causal agency in the world. You do certain things, and that I think can help break through, just get them to think about themselves. And of course, surely they wouldn't want to admit that they're not an intelligent agent, right? So.
Just one more thing that I have often, and it's involved in one of the last things I talked about in my session on intelligent design, where I utilized the John Love's Mary written in the sand. Part of the point I was trying to make there is you can determine that statement was intelligently designed. That doesn't mean you're able to discern who did that. Scientifically, we can deduce if something is intelligently designed, but if you're going to want me to identify who or what that designer is, Then I have to bring in other areas of knowledge and understanding, theologically, philosophically, that will bring me to that conclusion.
Okay.
But science only leads me to whether something is designed or not designed.
And people have to want to be open to the evidence. And the one thing I would caution about, even though I think there's overwhelming evidence for design and purpose and against a blind Darwinian process, you have to be open to hearing the evidence. And no amount of argument can force someone with a hard heart to grapple with it. And I remember a discussion that I had. I was invited once, as I think a token because I was a social scientist, not a scientist, to speak to an interdisciplinary group at a really quite left-wing state college in my home state. And it was co-taught by a biologist and by a historian, which I think maybe that's also why I was invited, because the historian was a little more open. And the talk I gave was on various misconceptions and stereotypes about the evolution debate. It was trying to open people's minds. But what was most illuminating was after the class having a discussion with that biology professor, where we went into, and I sort of pressed him on his explanation for how you get biological information, for how you get life from non-life. And to his credit, he was fairly honest in saying he didn't know, and that, yeah, the odds were just astronomical, but he was not open to considering something else. No amount of evidence is going to convince someone if their real issue isn't with the evidence. It's a lot of other issues. So I'm very much one for rational debate and discussion. For the very least of it, strips away the excuses, so that someone at least maybe has a chance to face that there's some hardness of heart going on. And then there are lots of people who are honestly seeking, and then for those, I think it is very important. But I'm under no illusion that Richard Dawkins, no matter what amount of evidence, is going to turn into Doug Axe or Steve Meyer. Even if I believed in evolution, I wouldn't think it would go that much, change that much. But because I don't think he's open to it. And it's not because he hasn't been proved wrong. As of 2008 or 9, he was still proclaiming that more than 90% of our human genome was junk. That's now, no serious person believes that anymore. He was wrong on that. Has that changed his view on design of the genome? No, because he's impervious to evidence.
Zach Moore, Keller. So the theological and philosophical implications of intelligent design seem fairly obvious, but I was really curious, what were the scientific implications? So are there any sort of heretofore inaccessible areas of exploration that we can now access? Are there any novel mechanisms that we can explore? Do we have to rewrite the past 200 years of biological science?
Very good question. The last chapter of my book is called, my book, by the way, is Undeniable: How Biology Confirms Our Intuition That Life is Designed. Chapter 14 is called The New School. And I've argued in the first half of the book that our intuition that life is designed is correct. Here's how you know it's correct. And then to finish the book in chapter 14, I try to give a brief account of what biology could look like if we could get out of this materialist paradigm. And I'm not giving a theory, I'm not giving answers to questions. I'm saying there clearly is a way you go about doing science that's predicated on your understanding of what the thing is that you're studying. And if, when we study life, we're studying things that were accidentally cobbled together through natural selection, there are assumptions that go into that. And junk DNA fit very much with those assumptions. You have something that's being accidentally experimented with every now and then, rarely it hits upon something useful. You would expect that most of what's in the genome would be junk, and occasionally it finds something useful. If you approach biology from a design perspective, if you get out of that materialistic, naturalistic mode of thinking, you wouldn't have thought that most of the genome would be junk. You'd assume that this is a design thing. That's just one example. I use I use an analogy with engineering in chapter 14 where I say, imagine a version of computer science where we assumed that computers were the product of accident, that they just happened. We have amnesia about how they were designed and what they are, and how we would study computers as if they were natural things that just happen, and we'd probe them and find various physical aspects of them. What we wouldn't find in doing that is the concept, the Turing machine concept, which is the idea that gets implemented in computers. We wouldn't get the idea of computing. And I think by analogy, biology has not got the idea of life. We have not yet grappled with the question, what are living things? Because we assume they're physical things that happen from the bottom up. If you assume otherwise, if you think about life as an engineer, if you allow yourself to think about it seriously that way, then you would say, what are the principles, what are the ideas that are implemented in life? And we haven't even opened that box because we're not allowed to. So I argue that something very exciting would happen if we could break free of the current materialist thinking and allow biologists to think more freely.
I agree with all that. I'd also refer you to Steve Meyer's first book, Signature in the Cell, where he actually gives a detailed appendix of the sorts of questions that would come out of a design paradigm. But I do want to offer one other sort of a larger meta view of the history of science. I would actually argue that science has progressed, in biology especially, in spite of the Darwinian paradigm, not because of it. And in fact, a very good and strong argument can be made that even the Darwinists, insofar as they are making progress in understanding things, are actually following a de facto design paradigm. And this goes back, if you go back to the very early beginnings of modern science, why do we even think that the world is intelligible? Why do we think that it's not just random, blind, chaotic, for which a lot of pagan, non-Christian cultures sort of believed? You had a whole set of principles, presuppositions, if you will, about why you should expect to find order in nature, things working. And so your operating assumption of science, when you look at things, is that actually things are working somehow, and then I'm going to figure out how. That's actually applying a design approach. I'd say the very heart of the scientific method actually presumes intelligent design. And a number of people have sort of written on this, but practically speaking, when this hit me as a social scientist, one of our fellows is Scott Minnick. He's a microbiologist at the University of Idaho. And one of the first conversations I had with him as to why he was attracted to intelligent design, it was an aha moment for me when he talked about his aha moment. Well, what he does is look at biochemical systems in the lab and basically reverse engineers them. In other words, you look at this biochemical system, the bacterial flagellum, which he has actually done some work on, anything else, you actually assume, for the sake of understanding it, that the things are there for a purpose, they're actually working together in an integrated system, and you try to reverse engineer it and understand it from a design paradigm. That's what bench science largely is about. It's not telling stories of what happened 5 billion years ago or 4 billion years ago. It's actually, how do things operate now? And that is applying a design approach. And so he said the reason he gravitated towards intelligent design is it actually fit with what he was doing in the lab. And he was so frustrated because sometimes he would do and find this thing, he'd write it up and publish it, try to publish it in a journal, and then he was forced to add the obligatory obeisance to Darwin paragraph that so this shows this about evolution, when in fact it didn't, and evolution in fact had nothing to do with what he was finding out. He just had to stick in that paragraph. One more little factoid on that. Like I said, the question is not about whether design will show new things, it's what in science does not owe itself to the design paradigm, even in biology. One of our Darwinian paradigm. So what doesn't owe itself to a design paradigm in reality. What really owes itself to Darwin, particularly. Phil Skell was a member of the National Academy of Sciences, a good friend of Discovery Institute, and one of the things that he did in the ending decade of his life was actually interview a lot of people who made key biological and biochemical research discoveries in the last century, and he asked them a question. if you did not think that Darwinian evolution was true, how would that have impacted your research questions, how you framed, how you went along with your science, to get this? And basically, to a man or woman, their answers was, it had no bearing. And Phil Skell's point, as a member of the National Academy of Science, was that Darwinism was pretty much a dead end when it comes to experimental science. It's a gloss added after the fact. It's really irrelevant to the modern scientific enterprise. So.
One last quick comment on that. One of the architects of what's referred to as the modern synthesis, usually referred to as neo-Darwinism, was Theodosius Dobzhansky. And he is famously quoted repeatedly of having said that in biology, nothing makes sense except in the light of evolution. And my experience in graduate school, particularly in molecular and cell biology, is that neo-Darwinism was simply not necessary. It's not needed. My quick answer, how much would have to be reevaluated? Probably not much. What could be avoided is just what John was referring to, is that light gloss that tends to be added to many papers, making an evolutionary connection, which sometimes, just as I've read papers in the journal Cell or Molecular Biology, what's that even there for? Even when I was a grad student, I didn't see the point, didn't see the purpose. It didn't really add any value to what was being discussed. So how much of actual biology would have to be reevaluated? Probably not that much. And as I indicated earlier, even in the cell and molecular biology literature, they already use design language quite frequently. Molecular machines, molecular systems, biological systems, that kind of language is used repeatedly.
But I think Doug's point is also right. When you have the blinders on, if you actually look in the history of Darwinism, it's not just not been helpful, it's really been a science stopper. Junk DNA is, in our lifetime, probably the biggest example of this, of where writing off 90% or more of our genome because it didn't code for proteins and because that didn't fit in the engine of neo-Darwinism. So you say, well, must have accumulated this worthless stuff in the blind Darwinian process. That was a science stopper that slowed the progress of science. And so C.S. Lewis wrote that nature gives answer to the questions we ask of her. And I say the worst thing about neo-Darwinism is that it really restricts the questions you're asking, and so you get what you ask for. And the thing about intelligent design is by broadening out and explicitly getting back to the foundation stone of science, that things are designed for a purpose, therefore we should want to find out how they work, you're actually engaging in a freeing of the sorts of questions you can ask, and that will yield new insights. On junk DNA, our mathematician Bill Dembski in the 1990s was actually saying in articles that, well, if the genome was designed for a purpose, this operating assumption that the 90% that doesn't code for proteins is just junk isn't a really good assumption. It may well have really intricate functions. And he was saying that way before the Genome Project and the ENCODE project actually began to show that.
Hey, my name is Paul Carby. I am a Swibbit student in philosophy and apologetics. Hey, there you go. So throughout human history, the relationship between science and theology has always been very strong. It's only in the last several hundred years that it's actually kind of divorced itself. As science progresses and as the new atheists continue to nail or try to nail theology in its coffin with the advances of science and how cybernetics and gene therapy and things like that are continuing to progress us into almost a new stage of evolution as they code it. Do you think that the relationship between theology and science has passed its expiration date? And if not, what would be the roadmap to bring the two back together practically?
One approach would be to remove the excess baggage of the past of wrong ideas about the history of science and Christianity. And so I'm currently on a book project that's doing that. But then looking at the contemporary field, you would need to show, well, We just showed how naturalistic assumptions often are science stoppers or science slowers. They slow down research in many cases. So you could look at that and say, well, everybody has some idea of what they think is that upon which all else depends. Either it's God or it's nature, matter, energy, or something. Everyone has religious assumptions of some sort. So it's not like the Christians are the only ones who have a theology. There's a naturalistic theology. There's naturalistic assumptions about what is the ultimate thing. So everyone has some sense of, some set of assumptions that guide the way they think about the world. And so we're not alone as Christians in having those. So repairing the misconceptions about the history of this, a lot of these are still used, brought out as if, Galileo and the church, it's always been that way, right? The church, Christians have always held back science. And the story is a lot more complicated than that, and they misconstrue the past, but then bringing it up to date as well, just show how everyone has some kind of belief that functions like a religious belief, even if they don't call it a religion, and naturalism is one of those.
I'd like to add on that. I think, and I may be being too in your face here, the people, the new atheists, the Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett's, et al. Of the world, the Larry Krauses, frankly, I don't know why anyone gives them the time of day, because they are so far behind in the science, especially Richard Dawkins. It's like he hasn't stepped foot out of the 19th century. And so I'd say far from, this aberration post-Darwin of that there's sort of conflict between science and religion, really, as you point out, is an aberration. It's sort of a recent sort of thing. And in fact, some of this ideas that there's warfare between science and religion came out of the Darwin debates because for really propaganda purposes to try to tell a new meta-narrative. Having said that, post-Darwin, I think, because Darwinism is so wedded to natural selection and random variation as a designer substitute, that has sort of created if you will, a science-faith conflict. But the evidence since the last 2 or 3 or 4 decades is overwhelmingly on the other side. So it's sort of quaint. I mean, look at physics. I mean, from the exquisite fine-tuning of the laws of the universe, the sorts of things that you have people who are not Christians who are saying this. This is amazing. So how do you get around it? Well, let's have multiple universes. We don't have any evidence for it, but we want to get around the fine-tuning because we know that would just really be a real stretch. So let's come up with an infinite number of universes, so therefore anything can happen. Well, yeah, so then rational thought ends. If you just literally say that anything can happen and anything can be true, anything can be false, and we can't know anything, these very college professors, like Larry Krauss et al., we should defund them, because why should we even have universities if it is really true that we can't come to any true statements about anything? So it's a joke. And I think Christians actually need to have the self-confidence to say, Richard Dawkins, he hasn't published a peer-reviewed paper in decades, and he's the cutting edge of 1859 science. We've gone beyond that. And same with Larry Krauss, or even people who are really gifted like Stephen Hawking, who I think John Lennox in his own very winsome, wonderful, generous way points out. Stephen Hawking may be brilliant, but when he basically says he's explained away God, because if you just have the law of gravity, then you can have the universe. I'm dumbing down his argument, but okay, where's the problem with that? Well, then you can get a universe from nothing, is his argument. You can get nothing, meaning, absolutely nothing. Well, the law of gravity isn't nothing. So, they're making, nonsense arguments are still nonsense, even if a scientist makes it. So I think one of the things is we just need to be honest about that and say, we shouldn't even be taking you seriously when you make outlandish arguments. Come back and address the real questions. How do you get information in DNA? Where do you get the fine-tuning in an observable universe that there's only one universe? Answer the real questions, then we can have a serious discussion. But if you're just going to come up with nonsense answers, it should be treated like that.
Oh, hi, my name is Jaemin Zhou. I'm I'm from China, and I study engineering here in the United States. Now this is my first semester to study biblical counseling, and maybe I'll do a double major in apologetics. But I have and I go by, actually I go by Maverick because I like the movie Top Gun. Anyway, so I just have a question. So, I mean, actually this is a big reason why I became a Christian in China, because in our education we teach social Darwinism. We teach that humans are just animals, and like animals we should compete and fight with each other in order to survive and to get benefits for our lives. For example, my middle school teacher told us in class that we should not see each other as friends, but as competitors working against each other. Every year, lots of teenagers commit suicide in China just because they don't score high enough in college entrance examination. And some college students committed suicide simply because they're no longer number one in class. And someone even killed their classmates just because they're jealous about what his friend can get as number one in class. And this, I believe, social Darwinism, it is a very big thing standing between the Christian faith that tells us to love others as ourselves and the hatred that we should hate each other. I mean, there is this mathematical model called game theory developed by the mathematician John Nash Jr., which is described by the movie A Beautiful Mind. And I mean, for example, the zero-sum game means that in order to win the game, you just have to make someone lose. I mean, that is no difference from social Darwinism. And in fact, game theory is widely applied in international politics and economics. I mean, in fact, if we look at why so many people in China, they do not believe in Jesus. They just want to be atheists. Why? Because they don't believe the manna that can be sent by God to Israelites. Because often we're faced with zero-sum gains. Like when the supply is less than demand, that is a zero-sum game. If you want to get something, you have to make someone lose so you can get that thing. I mean, we can say, yeah, we should know how to sacrifice ourselves for others, but the people in China, they don't believe that. The people in India, they don't believe that. They're dying every day. I mean, so my question is, how can we tell the leaders of the world that these ideas of, humans are just animals, and there are limited resources in the world, therefore we should fight and compete with each other, that these ideas are wrong?
Well, I think you've eloquently stated some of the issues. I would say in China, one of the things that should be pointed out, and one of the things that you could argue is why in China would you like to give in to cultural imperialism by embracing social Darwinism? Because in fact, the various views that you just talked about come from Darwin. Darwin got some of them from Thomas Malthus. The dog-eat-dog, zero-sum game. This is the worst part of Western capitalism and really applied to the social world. So in actually putting that forward in China, they're actually allowing cultural imperialism of the West in the worst way, some of the worst ideas of the West to be actually imposed on China. And so I think helping to understand that and how Darwin was key on that might take the gloss off of some of that. On the science side, I'd say that a lot of our works of our people by Steve Meyer and others have been actually translated into Chinese and are available in Mandarin, and some of Illustra Media's videos, I think Unlocking the Mystery of Life and some others have been translated. I think Privileged Planet may have been into into Mandarin. And so there are also ways scientifically to get people to start seeing, well, actually, there's a lot more to nature than dog eat dog. The really pernicious thing about Darwin that you talked about in the moral thing is that he took what Thomas Malthus wrote about overpopulation, everything, it leads to starvation and limited resources and everything's a zero-sum game. At least Malthus actually thought those things were bad. Darwin turns that into a virtue. On the Origin of Species, he actually has a fairly infamous passage where he talks about it's from things like starvation and famine and disease and death that we actually get the production of the highest mammals and things. So in other words, he takes things that even Malthus thought was bad and makes it, that's our creator. That's a real, that's mind-blowing. Once you actually view those things, those are the things that actually brought us about. If you can show scientifically that that's not true, the way human beings got at the top of their game is not because of millions of years of survival of the fittest. It's actually because they reflect deep and caring design, and that if you're expecting to get to a more humane or a more prosperous society or a more successful society through this dog-eat-dog approach, you're not going to do it because that destroys things. And frankly, I would argue, as someone who actually does believe in free market capitalism, that those who believe that capitalism is based on dog-eat-dog, they don't know what they're talking about, because the real thing that actually brings wealth and prosperity and things is actually an innovation, is actually a giving of entrepreneurs and others who are actually trying to give something to society that they think, and they may themselves be selfish, but they are actually trying to offer innovations that actually people want and that move things forward. And from the free exchange of ideas and the free exchange of goods, it actually benefits both sides. So I'd say properly construed, even free enterprise really is not dog eat dog. That's actually the Malthusian gloss on capitalism. So, I'd say part of it is talk to people. Why are they imposing this dead white guy from Britain, who is an imperialist, on Chinese society? Why would you want to adopt that? And then, two, the science actually shows that sort of dog-eat-dog approach did not produce us. And so why would we want to follow that in our social interactions, since it really didn't produce us in nature?
Just a couple of things I'd like to add to that as well, and that is that unfortunately the great poet Simon and Garfunkel said it well: a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. That unfortunately is a very true and accurate statement for most people. And so what you're reflecting on of how people react in China to the social Darwinism, a lot of it's feeding what they really want to expect and believe about themselves to start with. And along with that, I was reminded, however, of the Chinese paleontologist who was mainly the main figure involved in the Shangjiang Cambrian deposits and contributing to the knowledge of the Cambrian explosion. When he visited the U.S. and he began getting pushback from Darwinian scientists about the things he was saying about the Cambrian, his comment was, "I find it interesting that in America, you can criticize the government, but not Darwin. But in China, we can criticize Darwin, but not the government." So in a sense, there is an advantage in China when it comes to criticizing Darwin, and that's a bit more of an open topic. And the last thing is simply that as much as we humans like to try to deny it, ideas have consequences. And what you're spelling out are the consequences in real people's lives of this idea that there is nothing that happens in the natural world, biological world, apart from competition. If that's all there really is, then that idea is going to have consequences in human society. It just is. But we want to spread this notion of people ought to be able to simply believe what they want to believe, let them go their own way, but yeah, ideas have consequences. And sometimes the only way to challenge some ideas is by analyzing what those consequences are.
Terry Hestelow from Fort Worth. For years, I have been using who I thought was Michael Behe, but find out today it's Behe. His work in a lot of my written arguments. One of the things that I found about Behe was that, and I really appreciated it, was that that he never made in his book Darwin's Black Box theological arguments to support anything he was saying. In fact, he made it a point not to do that. And so, you know, when we go back to how do we change our leaders, I think we have to be careful of being evangelistic in this area, because if people sense that we're being evangelistic, they're going to put up walls because they're afraid of what you might say or you might cause them to believe. But one of the things that Behe did was he made his arguments, which should have immunized the hearers against the lies of the tyranny that is evolutionary theory, the accidental universe theory. And so I wonder, and I ask you this question, knowing that in this environment, for one thing, we think, boy, this is something I'd like to study. It's really something that we ought to study, and we ought to get well read on it. Is to change our culture will change our leaders. And I don't know what your eschatology is, but if you change the culture, you can change the leaders. But one of the ways that perhaps, and I'm asking you, should we take a more Behe-ish approach to make sure that we're not giving them the out of just saying, you're a bunch of theologians, but rather destroy the foundations so that they may go off still holding on to the rubble of their foundations, but they'll know where to come back to when they want to find what the real answer is, what the logical, what the reasonable answer is. And I guess that's my question. Should we be more deliberate, not in trying to demand a response, but to simply respond to their need, which is to reveal the failures of what they believe?
I think you make a good point, and I think it's one of the, for me, one of the great attractions of the Discovery Institute's Center for Science Culture from the beginning. As I made that point early in my first presentation, intelligent design is not the latest version of creationism, because that does require a theological position to start from. Whereas with intelligent design, looking at the scientific evidence and simply trying to determine, is this best explained by an intelligent cause? And as I said earlier, identifying the intelligent cause isn't the scientific question. You can't answer that question scientifically. When I am on a secular university campus, I'm routinely asked, well, who do you think the designer is? And I always answer that question, well, I'm not afraid to tell you, but you need to understand the distinction. The science doesn't tell me that. Scientific evidence only tells me that this event, this cause, requires intelligent pre-programming, if you will. To answer the question of who, then I need to bring in philosophical, even theological perspectives, and I do admit that from my perspective, what I see in science is consistent with the God of the Bible. But that's as far as I go with it. And so part of I've been with Pro Ministries for over 40 years, and that has been how I've conducted myself scientifically in the academy, is I'm going to talk about the scientific evidence. That's all they understand, that's all they want to hear anyway. So if you want to then ask me about things beyond that, I'm glad to tell you. But you've asked.
Here's where the water is.
Yeah.
I Trotter, Duncanville, as sort of a counter to that, and this would be a challenge to the seminary. I ran into a situation which was the diametrical opposite of what he suggested, to try to get Discovery Institute people to come into our church and make a presentation. And the Minister of Education went to the Discovery Institute website and made a number of interesting observations. One, they're not creationists. They've got Jews and they've got agnostics there, and we don't want that bunch to come here. I would like, if possible, for the seminary to try to make sure that every young minister who leaves here is compatible with the idea that if you can find somebody who does not share your theological beliefs, but shares your views of nature, he's an ally and not an enemy.
Here-Ide, and that's what I do in my courses here, both in the college. We do have a college here, by the way, an undergraduate college, as well as a seminary that has apologetics master's program and a new philosophy master's program coming online in the fall. So we're here to equip young men and women to be savvy on these issues. And of course, when they put the scientific questions in full context, they're going to develop a theology from Scripture that will be able to place this scientific information in a theological context, because we're whole people and we have information from multiple sources. The Bible itself says we should expect to see evidence of God in nature, but that's Psalm 19, and the second half of Psalm 19 is, but yet special revelation is important, essential, because you need to know who the Creator is and how to be rightly related to Him. So there's nothing dishonest or tricky about us talking about intelligent design and not talking about God specifically, but because the Bible itself says we should expect to see evidence of design in the natural world, and you need special revelation to know who that is. So it's completely consistent, and our students are learning how to do this, and I think there will be more and more churches will be savvy on this topic in the future, and praise God.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
I'm Samdo Kim. I'm Southwestern Baptist MDiv student. I know that all of you are the biologists, but I have a question about the physics question. In light of Genesis chapter 1, our planet Earth had been created in earlier than any star. This is true if you look at the Genesis chapter 1. So that how would Christianity refute this idea if you Genesis chapter 1 is currently science seems to be in consistence with the Big Bang theory, which is current general idea in school all over the world, which is contradicts the Christian theory.
As I understand your question, you're interested in how would you correlate the findings of natural sciences with what the Bible teaches about the origin of the world in the first couple of...
The sequence of the creation, as you can see, our Earth has been created by first, and all of the star has been created the fourth day, so that the age of Earth is very oldest age, and than any other star. So, which idea is very far away from what I had already.
There's a commentary that I would recommend to you on Genesis. It's written by C. John Collins, and I use it in one of my grad courses and one of my undergrad courses. He's a first-rate Hebrew scholar. He knows the Hebrew text, and he's been involved in these origins issues. He's also conversant with the science as well, contemporary science. And he argues that, I think convincingly, there's parts of his commentary that I critique in my classes, but I think his overall argument is quite good, that the primary teaching of Genesis is that there's an analogy between God's working and resting. God could have made the entire universe in an instant if he wanted to, but it's clear, whether you believe the universe is old or young, it's clear that God did not make everything in an instant. He did it over some period of time, whether long or short. And the fourth day there's several different interpretations of how to make sense of the fourth day of the creation week, but not everything, Collins argues that not everything in the creation account is there for chronological reasons. Some of it is grouped for thematic reasons. You have a similar thing going on in the New Testament, for example, with the temptations of Jesus. Matthew records them in one order, Luke records them in a different order. Well, it's clear that at least one of the authors is organizing the material for thematic reasons and not for chronological reasons. And so you have, if you believe in inerrancy, as I do, and as we do here at Southwestern, and I'm pretty sure everyone on the panel does, then you have to admit that there are instances in the Bible where things are reported not in chronological order, but are grouped for thematic reasons. And he gives an elaborate Hebrew grammatical argument for this thing. And so anyway, go to C. John Collins, Genesis 1-4 is the name of the commentary. And we can talk more in private about that later. But it's a very fascinating issue. But I think there are ways to, that Scripture can be understood by leading Hebrew scholars that shows that it is consistent with the findings of modern science. We can talk about the details later.
Something I like to add as a biologist. I get asked a lot about the age question and the sequential order of things in Genesis and so on, and there's an article on Probe Ministries website, probe.org, Christian Views of Science and Earth History, where I go through 3 of the major views and different aspects of that, and I only tell people, and I give that presentation, I'll tell you what I think at the end. When I get to the end, I say, well, I'm a fence sitter between young age creationism and progressive creationism, older stuff. And 2 reasons I give for that. Number 1, I'm a biologist, so I don't have the Hebrew background. I don't have the Old Testament background. And as Mike has just indicated, there are conservative evangelical scholars who have all that Hebrew and Old Testament background who disagree on how to interpret Genesis 1. I can't even follow their arguments. And then I have physical scientist friends who have the geology, astronomy, physics background, who are conservative evangelicals who will disagree on how to interpret the scientific evidence of age. And I definitely can't follow their discussions. So I just say, hey, I don't really need to know this. It's not a salvation issue. And when I get to heaven, I'm going to enroll in Creation 101, and I'm going to watch the video in real time, because I've got plenty of it, no matter how long it takes.
Michael, this would be for you, but anybody else, I would be just curious, just a little bit off topic from what we've been on today. When it comes to apologetics, when it comes to the resurrection story and the story of Christ, who do you think is one of the better authors that really makes the case for Christ, Lee Strobel notwithstanding? If you want to include him, that's fine. I'm just the case for Christ in apologetic literature.
N.T. Wright has written on the resurrection. William Lane Craig has, those are 2, Gary Habermas, who was in conversation with Anthony Flew, famous atheist, who became a believer in a designer, and a good example of kind of a personal story of some of the earlier questions. He never came to Christ, but Gary Habermas, who befriended him, gave him very clear arguments for the resurrection, and it's evidence-based arguments. It's not like, well, now we're in theology, now it's just, well, believe what you want. No, there are rational steps you can take to actually infer the actual bodily resurrection as the best explanation of the evidence available. So it's not like natural scientists are the only ones who make evidence-based arguments. Historians, that's a historical question. So my PhD is in history of science. So my primary training is how do you infer the best explanation for a historical event? Well, the resurrection is no exception to that. And it's let ripple effects through history. So yeah, I think that's a good example of where, even though this conference has been thematically focused on the natural sciences, it's not like the natural sciences have a monopoly on rational discourse. Historians draw conclusions based on evidence, just like natural scientists do.
I'm Ron Sanders from the big city of Dawson, Texas, and we call it Big D. But The being Sal, the subject of agnostic Jews that work for the Discovery Institute sometimes have been brought up. I love The Devil's Delusion, great book. And what's really great about it is it gets down to that sort of philosophical underpinnings behind the new atheist movement and really attacks those underpinnings. And you've touched on this a little bit tonight, but how do you, what's the best method for helping people get past that philosophy is stupid, it's a waste of time, I don't actually have a philosophy, all I have is science, and you actually get down into showing those sort of presuppositions?
Well, no, at Pro Ministries, we have we do a conference yearly for high school juniors and seniors in the summer at Camp Copus, and we do introduce them to the concept of worldview, and we introduce them to several worldview questions that come from James Sire. And when in various contexts, I often will give an assignment. You can't do it there at the camp, but start asking these questions of some people and just get them thinking. Some of them are very basic. How do you know right from wrong? Well, most everybody could come up with some answer to that, but as you begin to answer, you're exposing your presuppositions. You're exposing your overall philosophy of life. Another question is, well, what do you think happens after death? Well, you'd be surprised. People ordinarily aren't ever asked that kind of question, but they have an opinion. And it starts a conversation, and people begin realizing, well, my answer to that question doesn't really have much to do with science. It has to do with other areas of knowledge. And we routinely encourage students, just use those as conversation starters. You're not trying to share the gospel. This isn't evangelism. Just let people talk and listen. What we often are unable to do in our Christian huddles, we don't know how to listen to people. Just let them talk to you, explain what they think, how they and what their convictions are, and suddenly they're realizing as they talk that, oh yeah, I do have some different ways of looking at things that I can't really explain to you where I got that. It's the way I think. And so sometimes just by asking questions and letting people just roll through what's on their mind, and often, as I like to tell our students, is that if you've truly engaged in listening, people can tell because you ask some follow-up questions. You really are listening, and they appreciate that. People love to be listened to. And as a result, they will often then respond, well, I've been talking a lot about what I think, so how would you answer that question? Well, the conversation just flows. So as I said, learn how to ask just some good questions. How do you tell right from wrong? Where did everything come from? What happens after death, and those kind of things. And people they have answers. One person, as they did it in the country of Belarus that I've visited frequently, they asked an older man on the subway train, the metro, and they asked him these questions. They got a nice conversation going, and when the guy got off the train, he turned around and he said, "Thank you. No one's ever asked me what I thought before." That tells you a lot. We're very good at telling people what we think, but we're rarely patient enough to listen about what they think.
I think I agree completely with that, and have cases myself. And talking with students when I was a college professor, you listen, and then that can give you an inkling of maybe some common ground or some key points. So I think that's number one. In that, I think if you can identify some key stereotypes that the person has that are thought stoppers, like, well, the only people who disagree with Darwin's theory are people who have no science background, who are just, they paint this stereotype. They're anti-science. Then you can find a way to explode those stereotypes. The more of those stereotypes that you explode, I think the more then it sort of begins to break down the facade that, well, oh, you mean, Well, that's really interesting. and people, it prods them to do something more. So I actually have a talk I give about 7 myths of the evolution debate, which is actually directed at some key stereotypes. One in the history of evolution is actually that really to believe in evolution, the Darwinian evolution, the only people who ever were critical of it or critical of its unguided process, they had to be biblical, Christian, and right-wing. Well, there are lots of examples on the other side. In fact, the founder of the modern theory of evolution by natural selection, the co-founder with Darwin, Alfred Russel Wallace, who by the end of his life had come to the idea that in fact the evidence in nature spoke for intelligent design. Still believed in common ancestry, but thought that the process of natural selection acting on random variations could only bring really little things. And when it just explained the human mind, explained feathers, all sorts of things, he thought, no, this just spoke evidence of mind. So in fact, intelligent design is not even against what the co-founder of the theory of evolution by natural selection says. And when people hear that, it sort of messes with this narrative, which is, oh, science was in this dark ages, then Darwin came down like Moses from the mountain with the 10 Commandments, which was the origin of species, and then you get the Hallelujah chorus and everyone turns over to blind, unguided evolution, and that's science with a capital S. Actually, when you understand, when students and faculty and others have to grapple with the fact that the co-founder of the theory with Darwin actually end up having a very different view that is a lot more like Doug Axe and Steve Meyer and Ray Bolin than it is Darwin, that messes with this background meta-narrative. And so finding those stereotypes, those myths, actually, this is why we're so excited about this book that Mike Keyes is nearing completion about these myths. I mean, I won't ask here, but how many of you grew up, just think in your own mind, grew up thinking that Columbus was in trouble because everyone, he thought the earth was round and everyone else thought the earth was flat, and they just thought that he was going to go and he was going to go off the cliff. I teach graduate students in our summer program. I've asked them, and a lot of people's hands have gone up. That is a complete and utter fabrication. I'm not the one to, Mike could tell you about it. And when people learn, oh, you mean people knew for a long time that the earth was round, and Bible-believing people knew that, and other people knew, and that wasn't an issue? That messes with because everyone makes their judgments based on this larger context of reality. And if that's based on phony things, maybe one of the most helpful things you can do is picking at them, not in a contentious way, but saying, oh, well, actually, that's really interesting. I thought that once too, but it turns out that, and you give them information, and then they begin thinking about that. So.
Hey, it's Paul Carby again. This question is primarily for the two biologists on stage, Dr. Axe and Dr. Bolin, and actually probably even Dr. Lino if you have a chance to answer on this one. I'm throwing you under the bus. So my question is, how deeply entrenched in socio-ethical issues, things like gender identity and euthanasia practices, abortion, things like that, how deeply entrenched in those social ethical issues is the idea of an intelligent designer? And how do they push back, or do they relate, and how do they work their way through?
My first response, part of my role at Probe Ministries has been not just with the origins issue, but almost anything that relates to biological science and faith. So I have also spoken a great deal about euthanasia, abortion, genetic engineering, human cloning, those kinds of things. And what concerns me about those ethical issues and the technology that we are developing to actually pursue some of those is that intelligent design is not on the table. Most ethicists aren't thinking in that framework. They are thinking, however, in an evolutionary framework primarily, which basically says we are just another animal species, and the individual really doesn't have a great deal of significance because it's the species that persists through time. not the individual. Individuals are temporary. And they view, quite literally, the body, the organism, as simply DNA's way of making more DNA. So if we need to undergo certain euthanasia, abortion practices that may help ensure, at least in our minds, survival of the species, but may end up being, quote unquote, discriminatory towards some individuals, so that the individual isn't really important anyway. What we need to be more concerned about, and it's something Darwin actually, John mentioned it, concerning Darwin and Descent of Man, where he was concerned about our helping out the poor and those who are, quote, the less fit to survive, and they end up reproducing, and we're kind of making it worse for ourselves. Well, there are plenty of evolutionary ethicists who see it exactly that way. And my concern with the developing technology for genetic engineering is not the technology itself. It's the overall worldview of the scientific community and the culture at large. That primarily is an evolutionary worldview. Even many Christians, as we could say, are really, they say they believe this and this and this, but the way they live life is that of a functional atheist. So my concern is the worldview, the culture, that will end up influencing how those decisions are made, not really the technologies themselves.
You can go ahead.
Well, I've been told I'm going to close it after.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I agree with Ray particularly on the new genome editing technology, CRISPR. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there's a lot of hype over this. George Church at Harvard is saying expect a woolly mammoth to be produced within 2 years because we're going to edit Indian elephant DNA or African elephant DNA. Expect technology to reverse aging, the aging process, within 10 years. All of this, I think, is it shows arrogance in that it presupposes an understanding of life that I don't see biologists having. I don't think biologists have asked the right questions to even understand what a genome is. And if you don't even know what it is, how are you going to edit it meaningfully? I don't think these questions have even been asked. So someone like Church, I think, just assumes that we've got it all right up to this point. So I'm not at all worried that scientists are going to go into the lab and create superhumans, a new species. That's not going to happen. But they could make a huge mess along the way, and they could show disdain for everything that's true and right and honorable, and make a huge mess, ethical mess. And I would expect that to happen if brakes aren't put on. It seems to me almost perversely, it's not really ID that's the thing that's opposed. It almost seems as though Christianity itself is the thing that is perversely opposed, so that everything that is held as sort of foundational in the relationship between humanity and their maker is inverted. And people want to push all of those boundaries and absolutely invert them. We were not created by God. We create ourselves, and we'll show it by going in the lab and recreating ourselves. We were not created male and female. The list goes on and on. All of these things are specifically challenged. I don't think it's ID ultimately that's being attacked. I think it's Christianity. That's my opinion.
One, if you want to connect with the sexual identity debate, I teach here in a biology class. Our students know that, for example, gay men, most of whom practice anal intercourse, this is using a body part that it wasn't designed to be used for. And statistics show that about 1/3 of gay men lose normal bowel control because they're using a body part for something it wasn't designed for. So that's a very specific issue where having an improper view of what the human body is can lead to even health problems.
John, did you have anything?
I'm not a biologist, but I would say that actually the question you asked, insofar as I understand it, actually goes way beyond biology. And I do think if you have a sense of proper function, the idea of design, if you think the design reflects some sort of transcendent purpose behind it, you are much less likely to think that we have the right or the knowledge to tinker with it. So this gets to Doug's idea. And if you look at the history of social Darwinism in America and Europe over the past century, it was largely driven by people who thought, you know, we don't reflect that sort of transcendent design, therefore, you know, why can't we surmount, you know, in fact, the eugenics movement, as I write in my book, Darwin Day in America, and if you go actually deep into their literature of how they understood themselves, they thought they were being humanitarian because they thought, look, the way we got the way we are, it's like the student who suggested from China, it's from this really dog-eat-dog survival of the fittest. That's what created us. Therefore, if in a humane society we're trying to counteract that to be humane by helping those that nature would have killed off, that's going to destroy us because that's the only thing that got us up here. So they thought, well, you know, we like to be nice people. We don't really like the law of the jungle. So wouldn't it be more humane if we exerted through our own reason selection in a more humane way so we don't have to go back to the law of the jungle? And so it was precisely because they thought what produced us was this blind struggle for survival, and they didn't want to go back to that. They thought, well, now we can actually do it better than nature because nature doesn't reflect the views of a transcendent God. It reflects, you know, really the happenstance of survival of the fittest that was unplanned. So why can't we do better than that? And so I do think that there are real implications for bioethical issues about, you know, do human beings think they should play God? Well, if you think God doesn't exist, or by definition, and that's not how we were produced, you're going to be much more likely to say, sure, let's design a baby ourselves. Let's do X, Y, and Z.
And I appreciate it, Paul, for bringing the ethical side of things to this. Let me just kind of highlight some of the things that have already been mentioned and just kind of bring this to a close. But first of all, I'd like to say that if you want to see what the social Darwinist viewpoint will do to a society if it's taken to its logical conclusion, go read Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World. I mean, that, you know, it's not a, you know, it's fiction, but you begin to see this is what all this would play out and try to look like, at least from the perspective of somebody who's living in the 20s and the 30s. And so it's actually a really interesting look at what someone could think it would lead to. But what I've found in the ethical realm is when we're dealing with things like the eugenics movement, abortion, euthanasia, the sexuality questions, that when we ask those questions, what we found is those that are proposing to come look at it from a Darwinist perspective, if they're generally not very consistent in the application on the ethical question. One of the ones that is actually very consistent, I forget, one of you mentioned Peter Singer earlier today. Singer is actually very consistent in this perspective, particularly on questions of abortion, infanticide, and euthanasia. One of in his argument for, he's actually arguing for infanticide, he's making the case that in order to be a person, you have to develop a certain number of characteristics and rational capacities, and you have to eventually get beyond what a higher level animal or a chimpanzee or ape or something like that in order to even deserve the right to life. And so he acknowledges that most human beings would not reach that point until at least the age of 2, probably 3, and maybe even a little bit older than that, and I'm talking years. And he says, so you really have one of two options. You can either say personhood begins at conception, or it begins sometime down the road, a couple years down the road after birth. But even Singer acknowledges in his writing on this that this is a politically untenable position, because it's going to be almost impossible to get a society at this stage to agree that we should be you should have the right to kill your baby up until the baby is fully self-aware and able to communicate and all these types of things. So he's willing to back it down to just a few months. But he's probably the most consistent coming from this evolutionary standpoint in making the ethical arguments. And then he proceeds to pretty much tear apart everybody else, any other viewpoint along the way, whether it's viability or at birth or something like that, arguing for abortion up to that point. And so there are huge ethical ramifications for the things that we've been talking about today. And questions of artificial intelligence. I mean, we haven't even really gotten into that realm, but there's huge questions about artificial intelligence, artificial superintelligence, things that are at least being discussed, I think. In Doug's viewpoint, and I tend to agree, and I know Michael as well, the question of, can we actually do, or will we ever be able to do the things that we claim might be possible is we should probably be more skeptical than some of the literature might make it out to be, whether we'll actually ever be able to do those things. But there's huge ethical ramifications for this. So, well, first of all, let me thank you for coming to our Grindstone tonight. Let me thank the students who were here, who weren't able to come to the conference, but were able to come out to the Grindstone. And would you join me in thanking Ray Boland, John West, Doug Axe, and Michael Keys for being a part of this? And this brings to a conclusion our Science and Faith Conference. However, if you would like some resources available from the Discovery Institute and books, if I understand, the book table has been moved downstairs. So if you just go move that way out towards the lobby under the stairwell, you should be able to find the book table, so you have one last chance to get some resources. Thank you for coming tonight.